We've seen the videos and we've heard from Bob Thompson, the former Border Protection Officer, and he clearly thinks those objects are something anomalous. How to resolve this? Well, I've come here to Rocket City, Huntsville, Alabama, where it just so happens there's a conference of the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs. There are a bunch of scientists who think, despite the stigma, despite the ridicule, it is possible to still investigate the phenomenon. So let's see what they say.
Hey Peter, come on in and sit down, mate. Lovely. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
So Peter, just tell me first who you are and what your expertise is.
Okay. My name is Peter Reali. My background is I was an electrical engineer. I worked in Silicon Valley for 30 years, and I'm retired. And I have a master's degree in electrical engineering from the University of California at Berkeley. And I'm a California resident. Then I retired to Idaho about 11 years ago. And now I became interested in, I never had time to, investigate this subject. And so I came across Robert Powell's web. He was looking for original people to, do investigations. That was like back in 2017. And I've been involved ever since. I'm also an amateur photographer, and I enjoy that a lot, actually. And I also have I play blues harmonica. It's kind of a side thing I like to do,
So do you have any particular interest yourself before all of this in UAPs?
I did. I read books occasionally, but, I never had time to pursue it in any. I'm kind of, in that sense, I'm kind of an outsider to the SCU because many of these people have been investigating UAP for years. I mean, I call them UAP because UFO has other context. I'm very neutral. I'm very critical about that there be facts involved, and not just speculation. But I think that brings something into the SCU,
So let's talk about the purpose of SCU. I mean, it's the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs.
Right.
What are the methods and the ideas that you use behind that when you come to investigate a UAP case?
Well, we're fact-based. I'm a nuts and bolts kind of guy. UAP isn't one thing. Or UFOs aren't one thing. There's many manifestations, but I think the original idea was to get science. I don't think SCU is going to figure out what these things are by themselves, but there's such a stigma against this subject in the scientific community that we wanted to show that there's something behind this. There's actually facts and data behind it.
So you can investigate UAPs.
Yes.
Whatever they are,
yes.
It's possible to investigate them.
Yes, if you have data, and that's what we try to do is find data,
So SCU's become quite well known for 3 investigations of very interesting videos.
Yes.
The first is, of course, the Nimitz case, the 2004 Nimitz case, the U.S.S. Nimitz off the west coast of California. The second is the Aguadilla case. And the third is the Rubber Duck.
Yes.
And that's your area of expertise.
Yeah. I worked on the Nimitz with Robert, and then I worked on the Rubber Duck, but the Rubber Duck is the most recent.
Okay, so the Rubber Duck, as I understand it, was captured in 2019.
Yeah.
It was taken from a twin-engine C-26 aircraft at roughly 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
Let's have a quick look at it.
All right. Yeah. If you look at it, it looks like a rubber duck.
It does look like a rubber duck, doesn't it?
Yes. And I actually tried to get them to change the name, but I gave up because they would laugh at me. But it's a solid object. And it
So why do you know it's a solid object?
because it maintains its shape well, first thing is the video that I looked at was a half-hour video, and I analyzed it in detail. You see all the green, it's called the green writing is called metadata, and you can actually with that data, if you have what the definitions are, you can actually analyze a lot about the actual video. And if you look at the video for a long time, it maintains its shape, but it kind of precesses, it moves back and forth, it's rigid. And if you understand again, the metadata, it's colder than the outside, it's solidly colder. It's not hot, and most objects moving through the atmosphere are warmer.
So because you'd be looking here, I mean, is this object, in your opinion, moving under some kind of controlled propulsion?
Yes. Because,
why do you say that?
Because it moves in a circular, it's moving in a kind of circular pattern around an area in lower Arizona. It's called it's a wildlife preserve. And the GPS coordinates, the top left corner, you can actually track where the airplane...
So it's not going in a straight line, just randomly drifting across the landscape?
Yes, and the reason I know that is because in the top left corner there is the GPS coordinates of the airplane, and also the altitude doesn't change. And so if you notice that it stays approximately in the middle of the video, the cameraman was actually tracking this. So because it's circling, the plane is circling, and this remains at a fairly average, fairly average in the center of the screen, it's also circling.
So
otherwise it would go off the screen.
What's it circling? What's in the middle of that circle?
Unknown. It doesn't make any sense what it's circling, why it's doing it.
But importantly, I didn't realize this before, so by looking at the metadata, you're able to show that it's actually guiding itself. It's moving under propulsion and it's changing course.
Yes, and it continues in a circle,
And yet it's cold.
It's cold.
So
now,
my simple little bare brain thinks if you're going to propel something, you either need a propeller or a turbine, a jet engine or something like that. Or even for a balloon, in order to propel it, you'd need something to propel it.
Usually balloons are propelled by wind.
Could this just be wind? Could the wind have been circular?
Well, that's what that's the main discovery in the paper, is that you can actually calculate, from what I said, you can actually calculate the velocity at different altitudes. We don't know what the altitude of it is. It could be close to the surface. It's still above the mountains, the San Gabriel Mountains down there. I think they're the San Gabriel Mountains, but and they're about 1,700 feet high. And if you watch the video it never goes between anything. It's always above it. And the plane is at about 20,000 feet or 25,000 feet. I've kind of forgotten, exactly what the altitude was.
Can I ask you this? Is this object maintaining its own constant altitude off the ground?
We don't know. It could be, yes, but we don't know at what altitude it's at.
But whatever that altitude is...
It's fairly constant. It's probably changes a little bit, maybe a few hundred feet, but not much.
Okay, but let's talk about why it can't be something prosaic. Why couldn't it just be a balloon that's blown across the border?
Well, a balloon, if it's, there's two kinds of balloons, like a weather balloon or something like that, are pretty much transparent. Like they're made out of a kind of a rubber structure, and they're almost transparent to infrared.
What about a Mylar balloon?
Yeah, a Mylar balloon is reflective. And we've actually, what happens there if it's blown by the wind is it sort of jiggles around, and you'll see hot and cold sections of it, because when the parts that are near the sky will be colder than the parts that are on the ground because of the aluminum coating on the balloon. And we actually, in our report, David Falch actually did a video, did an experiment. I had him, buy some Mylar balloons and actually put them up there, and it looks quite different than this. I mean, it doesn't look anything like this. It wobbles, and it has black and white, black and
'Cause, I mean,
white.
I'm just making this up as I go along, but
Yeah.
let's assume the cartel's bringing cocaine or something like that into America through the border, pumping up a Mylar balloon and sending it over the border.
Yeah. It's
Could
not
that explain what we're looking at?
No, because like I said, a Mylar balloon doesn't look like that. And why, this thing is circling. It's not if you're sending drugs across the border, you'd want to have it go to a destination.
So,
Wind would.
Sure. In our very conventional way of understanding how things propel themselves through the air, we look for things like propellers or jet engines, don't we? Is there any visible means of propulsion on that object?
No. There's not a lot of pixels to actually analyze it, but if you had an engine, it would be hotter. So parts of rather than being cold, parts of it would show as hotter, but it's cold all through.
Did you have an opportunity to speak to the people who provided the video?
Not personally, but we had through email exchanges. We were under an NDA in the beginning because they wanted to remain anonymous. But when it was published on YouTube, we could then go ahead and remove the NDA. But so I couldn't get a lot of help on doing the analysis of it because we'd have to bring somebody in and have them sign an NDA, and it was difficult to do. He wouldn't have approved that.
So talk me through the science.
Okay.
How do you science something like this?
Well, it's basically mathematics. It's not complicated mathematics. It's kind of like trigonometry, really high school and maybe first year undergraduate type mathematics in college. I mean, compared to say a physicist or something is doing a very advanced thing. It's not that difficult, but it's not. You have to take an approach. The thing that made the breakthrough on this was, well, two things. One was being able to understand the metadata, and we have in the SCU we have a person who's an expert on this because he actually repairs these very same type of cameras.
So let's talk about what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
This is a camera system that's mounted on the bottom of the aircraft.
Yes, and
what sort of camera system?
it's a Teledyne. It's I think made by Teledyne, and it's an infrared.
Forward-looking infrared.
Yes, forward-looking infrared.
A FLIR.
A FLIR, and the metadata is proprietary. You just can't go look it up, But we were able to get enough of the metadata to be able to analyze it. And
okay, so let's look at the metadata here.
All right.
One of the first things that came into my mind was, could it be that the prevailing winds are blowing this object in the way that it's being blown?
The way I address that is first we can calculate the speed that the device is moving in a. It's not circular, but on an average it's circular. You can kind of average it, and we looked at wind, around the regional areas, 3 areas. You can actually, weather balloons were sent up, and it's public data. You can actually get the wind speed at different altitudes. And it calculated that, and it's faster than it moves faster than the wind speed at all the altitudes, almost a lot faster. I mean, probably, in the paper, actually graphs of that. And and even taking into account about a 30% range of errors, and error bars, it's still a lot faster than that. So it can't be propelled by wind.
What sort of speed are we talking about?
Well, again, that depends on altitude, right? If it's close to the plane.
What's the fastest speed that you see this object?
Well, if it was near the airplane, very close to the airplane, it would be about 250 miles per hour or something like that.
So you don't know the distance between the airplanes?
Well, you don't know the altitude.
Right.
Because if it's circling, like I said, at a lower altitude, it's covering less distance, right? So it's moving, remember, it's staying fairly centered on the screen.
How do we know that it's not closer to the camera than
we don't,
it appears?
but we do the calculations for all the possibilities, from being near and far. That's all taken into the paper.
And even when you look near, it's
Right.
still anomalous.
Yes.
Why?
Because of the wind speed, it's always faster than the wind. Obviously, wind wouldn't be 250 miles an hour or something
Right.
like that, And near the ground, wind speed might be 5, 10 knots, something like that, and it's faster than that.
Does the object ever move on itself?
Well, if you look at it, and I looked at it a lot, it sort of rocks. It maintains its shape,
right,
but it rocks back and forth, kind of like it's called like precession. It kind of goes back, and it's repeatable. It kind of does.
To be honest
this.
with you, a bit like a rubber duck in a bathtub.
Yes, yeah. I took a lot of. I wanted to rename it to the cold, analysis, some kind of scientific name, because I felt silly with using a paper with a rubber duck. But I got a lot of people started making fun of it, and I stopped and decided to just stick with the rubber duck and give up.
Now, I know the one thing you're never meant to do with a scientist is invite them to speculate, but I'm going to ask you to speculate.
All right.
Peter, what the hell is it?
I don't know. I know it's anomalous.
So you were going through the list of possible.
Yeah, I call it the
prosaic-
null hypothesis,
Right.
which is you assume that it's a conventional object misidentified.
So could it be a drone? Could it be a bird? Could it be a balloon?
Right, and well, a bird, would look like a bird. It would flop around. If you look at it, it's got a solid shape, and it just precesses.
So it's not a gliding bird?
For 45 minutes, have you ever seen a bird, that circles for 45 minutes, and it's obviously not a balloon. It's rigid.
But if it was just a balloon, it would just drift in the same direction.
Yeah,
according
as
to
the wind. And in the Appendix F there, I actually have what the camera operator and the pilot said. They said it was going against the wind. I can't prove that, but that's what they said. And
So you hear that in the audio from the aircraft?
it's in the written text that I got about what they said happened.
Sure.
And
Now, the other thing that we have to query is the people who provided SCU this video. There was Andy Marshall and an anonymous gentleman from the Customs Border Protection.
Yes.
Have you formed an impression as to their credibility?
yes, I think they're very credible, especially the source. And Andy Marshall provided the video.
And so why do you find the source particularly credible?
Why do I find it credible? Just the way he behaved. He wasn't trying to get fame. He gave a lot of details about how they got the video. They had to get permission from Homeland Security to release it. And just the general impression I had, he wasn't trying to become famous or anything.
Do you get, I'm inviting you here not to be a scientist for a moment, but just to sort of give me your gut feeling about what you're seeing. Do you get the impression that there is a willingness in government agencies like Customs and Border Protection to be open about the fact that there are these anomalous objects?
I don't get that impression. I just think that they lose, once it doesn't fit into their, first thing, if it doesn't involve drugs and it doesn't involve illegal aliens, they're not interested because that's their job. They have a very specific, it's just like the pilots. Why didn't the pilots fly down next to it? Well, they're restricted to stay at a certain altitude and cover a certain range.
Yes, but Peter, that's actually a very interesting response because they do have a job.
Yeah.
Border Protection's job is to secure the borders of this
Right.
country. How can they say they're securing the borders of this country if they don't explain what objects like that are? It's a national
Well,
security issue, isn't it?
They did do an analysis, and they pretty much determined it wasn't anything to do with drugs, and it wasn't anything to do with illegal aliens.
But
And so,
a priori,
well,
the simple fact that an object is drifting across the border and they don't know what it is.
but they work for people, right? And they have their the rules that they have to follow. So I can't blame them. It's from the top down. You can't just have people doing anything they want to do.
Could it be, these are obviously very sensitive military training areas we're talking about here. This whole swathe of Arizona is full of very important military training areas for new and advanced technology, top-of-the-line fighter jets, people training for war. Any foreign adversary, of course, would be very keen to know what strategies and tactics are being developed and used within these training areas. Could this be some kind of advanced foreign adversary drone?
Well, it's hard to know, but the looks of it, when you look at it, it doesn't look like a conventional machine. The structure is, it's kind of a rounded, it just doesn't look like a machine of some kind, I can't say more than that, but it doesn't give me the appearance of being something like that. But it could be, I can't rule that out, that there's some major development that, could do this, but I just, from anything I know, it doesn't seem possible.
Could it be non-human?
It's hard to know, my impression is that there are, I don't think it's, an alien type, there's no indication of that. There may be natural phenomena that we don't understand that might count, there may be something like that. But, how do we know what aliens are like? I mean, they're alien, right?
Could it be perhaps something that we've inadvertently caught an image of that is black world technology being developed in secret in that part of Arizona? I mean, we know that, for example, the town of Sedona, all around that little town, there are locals reporting anomalous objects doing weird things. There are military stopping people in the forest saying you're not allowed to come in here. There's a whiff, a suggestion of something there that's being concealed. Could this be black technology?
Well, I just don't know. Without more information, I can't really, say, a lot about that. I try to stick to facts, and data, and because if we don't, we can just go off the deep end, and come up with anything.
Okay, so Peter, what are we looking at here?
All right, well, it's a diagram of the airplane flying along, and it has three main angles. The gamma, which is the one closest to the top of the airplane, is the angle that the camera is pointing downward from the axis. The beta is the way it points away from the axis, and the alpha is the is the lens of the camera, the angular field of view of the camera. And we know the altitude.
Looking at all of these angles, what were you able to do?
Well, I could calculate the distance. Well, there's several diagrams, but I can calculate the actual speed of the object, and I don't know its altitude, but I can, because of this, the plane doesn't change altitude, very small amount compared to its altitude. I can kind of ignore that as a fixed distance.
So you've got SP1, that's speed 1, SP2, speed 2.
That's span distance.
Distance.
That's the distance that when you're looking through the lens on the screen, the screen that the operator's looking at, how much distance that is at different altitudes.
Right. But crucially, just so I understand, you were able to figure out by doing this that even if the object was there, closer to the plane, or there, a little bit further away, or there, a long distance away, either way, it's anomalous.
Yes, and yes. But through more arguments than that, but I mean, that's a piece of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we scroll forward to the speed one that I think is the most interesting one that came out in the interview?
Yeah, go down to the circle, the one that shows like the cone. That I think that's.
I'm really interested in the one where you were explaining.
Well, okay, this shows the.
Perfect. Yeah, this is it.
This shows the red is the actual GPS coordinates of the airplane over the 45-minute period, and the green is a hypothesized.
So just hang on a sec. Just slow down for a moment. Now, when we were looking at the video, you pointed out that there's these green metadata on the side of the video. They were able to show you the GPS coordinates. Right. Now, to our eyes, looking on, it looks like the object's going in a straight line.
Right.
What were you able to figure out by looking at the GPS coordinates?
That it's actually, it's not that's only for like 10 minutes or so. It would be too complicated for the full 30 minutes, but the green is the path of you see the actual GPS coordinates on there, is the path of the airplane. You can see it circling not perfect circles, but pretty much following this object, because the object, it's on the screen, the object remains centered.
Is there any natural, prosaic explanation that you were able to come up with that can explain how an object with no visible means of propulsion could circle?
No, not that I can think of.
I mean, it's wacky. I mean, to me, that's the kicker.
Yeah.
That's what shows that it's definitively
I mean,
anomalous.
wind doesn't do that. For 45 minutes, wind changes.
I mean, it couldn't be a vortex, some kind of tornado or something?
Well, it was it was a clear night. There was no storms.
So there's no suggestion of high intense winds that are getting circular?
No. I mean, that's described to the pilots. It wasn't.
Is there any kind of facility at the center of that circle that the object might have been taking
I looked at
interest in?
that. I couldn't find anything. It's just a desert. I couldn't find anything why it would do that.
Could there be something underground?
That would be. I tried to look for something like that, like it's some kind of magnetic anomaly or gravitational anomaly. I couldn't find anything. I don't know. It's just
But what we do know is at 1 o'clock in the morning, there's an object that looks like a rubber duck, operating under its own power, intelligently controlled, circling a unknown area in the desert.
Intelligence in the sense that
It's guided.
It has some guidance, or it's. I just don't know. I just know that I called it anomalous because it's not understandable in any conventional object that I can see.
Has Customs or Border Protection said anything to explain this?
No, according to the source, they looked at it for a while, and because it didn't have anything to do with their main task, they just released it and just, that's their job, right? Their hands are full doing just that job, so they weren't interested in beyond that.
So just to double check something, you're not getting the impression that they're trying to cover up incidents like this?
No.
It's just because it's not drugs, it's not immigrants that sleep.
They have a job to do, like if you have a job, right? You're told to do something, and if you don't do it, you get in trouble. I think that's the part of it. At least, I have a limited understanding of Homeland Security and their procedures and stuff, but just from what in doing the report and talking to people, that's the impression I get.
I have to say, I find it intriguing that an object in the middle of the night is circling an empty area of the Arizona desert.
But I mean, the Nimitz was a similar thing. These objects go up and down from 80,000 feet and go down to the ground. They're going up and down and up and down. What are they doing that?
Have you been able to get on the ground there and have a look?
No, I've never been there. This is all done by just, analysis and stuff, I mean, I did examine the area, from, looked up it's the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Reserve. And, you can go on the web and you can look at what it is, but there's not much to it,
It does fascinate me, though, that this is one of a cluster of anomalous objects that are being seen in military training areas right across Arizona.
I've looked at the history of this for the last 70 years, and my impression is that everywhere sees anomalous objects from time to time. It isn't, I don't think, I think you go to Idaho, where I'm from, and if you get out into the rural area and wait long enough, you're going to see an anomalous object. I think that some of these other, like the Bruja video. Bruja means a witch or a male witch, I believe. That I'm speculating, but it's a similar video, and I think it was taken like 5 years later.
Yeah.
And it has a similar shape. But because there's no metadata, I can't, there's metadata, but I can't get the coordinates or any of that. Whoever tested it in something has remained anonymous as far as I know.
Crucially, there's something anomalous circling an area of the Arizona desert. It's operating apparently under guidance, some kind of control. There's no visible means of propulsion. I think we've got to go there.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea for people to research that area.
So, Peter, it's 9 at night. I think it's February 2020 sometime. And you see this?
You see it, if you look at it close, it's very similar to the rubber duck. If you zoom in on I'm actually a photographer and I have the tools to be able to go in and look at the pixel level. It's shaped very much like, very much like the rubber duck. It also the same camera. They were calibrating, my understanding is they're calibrating it on the ground. It's just sitting on the ground, so it's not an altitude or anything. And the interesting thing about it is it passes by some cattle, and they don't even notice it.
So it's probably no noise there.
It may be invisible to sight.
So there's two things that we learn from this. Obviously, cattle are hot, so the object's cold.
Right.
What else do you deduce from it?
It's very strange, to have something that probably can't be seen. I mean, I'm sure that cattle would react. They just sit and eat.
Just roll, Miguel?
I think if something was in the air, like a bird or something, they'd look up.
So those cattle aren't noticing there that there's anything floating over?
They're not. That's the first thing I noticed was how strange that is. It just goes by. But we don't know the altitude, see? That's, without having the geometry, we can't tell. It may be actually a lot closer to us, and it looks like it's near the cattle.
Wouldn't the plane have had radar? Would it have picked it up on its radar system if it was a solid object?
Radar doesn't work very well for these kind of things. All of the best reports we've had are with infrared.
Right.
The radar doesn't. It works sometimes, but not always.
Okay. So Peter, what I can tell you about this is not a lot. It's called the Cigar by the people that gave it to us, and it shows an object filmed off a monitor from a circling aircraft or a hovering aircraft. Do aircraft hover? It's filmed from an aircraft looking down on this object, and it's filmed off a screen. Unfortunately, the metadata on the side, unlike the rubber duck, is not visible.
The question is it hotter or colder?
Can you reach any conclusion there?
Well, you can set the camera so hot is either black or white, and I don't know what that is because I can't read the data. It's very blurred, but if we had a good video, we could analyze it. If we knew the.
It's intriguing though because it's a strange looking object. You can see why they call it the Cigar.
Yeah, it looks like It looks like the two ends are. To me, larger than the center part. It looks like two large objects connected by something smaller.
Like a flying dumbbell.
Yeah, something like a flying dumbbell. But so much of this is based on perspective, and how you, and the clarity here is very poor. I mean, because it, was taken.
Could the apparent speed also just be a parallax effect because the plane's moving at speed as well?
That's the whole key. Is parallax plays everything in these videos. If an object, if it's close by, and you're sitting still, like a bird going by, and you photograph it, it could look. If you said it was at a distance, it obviously would be at far distance. It would be traveling.
Sure.
You can't tell. You need to know the distance to the object, and that's why in the rubber duck video, because we had that information, we could actually calculate this.
Sure.
So it's hard for me to without more data, it's kind of inconclusive.
Sure. It's intriguing though, isn't it? Because it obviously attracted the attention of the Homeland Security or Border Protection people that filmed it. What would you like to know?
Well, the intriguing part is it doesn't seem to have any lift capability of any lift mechanism. It doesn't appear to have an engine. It's one solid color. So usually if there's an engine, it would be, if it's infrared, and it is an infrared camera, it looks like the same camera, the green. It would have a hot engine and perhaps a cold surface. It maintains its shape and moves along. So that's interesting, but hard to know much beyond that, you know. And it seems to be going through it's above everything. I don't see it circling between.
So it's
anything.
holding altitude.
Yeah, it's holding altitude. But the speed is hard to determine because we don't know how far away it is due to parallax. The angles and those kind of things, I don't know whether they were intentionally blurred or I think someone told me that they had an iPhone and they were videoing it from the iPhone onto the actual screen.
Right.
So that's they must not have recorded the video. Or
I mean, clearly agents working inside these agencies are concerned enough about these
yes,
videos to leak.
I mean, if you're out flying somewhere and you see things like this and you can't explain them, I mean, how do you explain it? I mean, it doesn't have wings. It doesn't seem to have propellers. It doesn't have, you know, so it's something to.
It's a genuine mystery.
Yeah. Just don't know what to make out of it. It's certainly interesting. If we had better data, it would be worth analyzing.
Matthew, can you set me out your credentials? Who are you? What do you do? Where do you come from? Why are you able to speak about this issue with any competence?
Sure. I'm an astroparticle physicist, specifically an experimental one. So that means I'm not a theoretical physicist. So I'm really a nuts and bolts physicist, scientist. I'm currently an associate professor of physics at the University at Albany SUNY, State University of New York System. And my alma mater is University of Chicago, which is an institution well known for physics and for churning out really good scientists.
Now, why are you interested? Why is a scientist like you interested in the phenomenon of UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena?
I'm interested because I like solving mysteries. The main physics that I work on is dark matter, which is a different mystery, but one that's accepted by mainstream science. And I think of UFOs or UAPs as another mystery, and I think it's a mystery that's worth pursuing and solving, and doing so using the tools of the scientific method.
Okay, so what conclusions broadly have you reached from your own work that you've been doing into the UAP issue?
A broad conclusion that I've come to already is that the phenomenon is worth studying, whatever it is. I don't think it's possible, I haven't been able to conclude yet conclusively that we're talking about one specific thing, be it, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, any of the famous hypotheses. I'm not ready to say that there's a solid conclusion for any of them, but I am able to say personally, from looking at things, I can conclude that it's at least something happening, something interesting, and something worth studying, something that PhD scientists and engineers should study.
Could we just get a few methods resolved off the top? Carl Sagan famously said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, which sounds good, but is it true? Under the scientific method, in order to prove a phenomenon that is anomalous, do we need any more proof than we normally need in the scientific method?
That's a really good question, and I'm of the opinion that we don't. I feel that statement by Carl Sagan is a beautiful statement, but I feel like it's been used as a cudgel to bludgeon people, and to not allow people to look at the evidence. I think the problem with that statement is the word extraordinary is a word. It's not mathematical, it's not a statistical statement. I think that we are not quantifying what extraordinary evidence is, and part of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you don't give money and funding and you don't allow scientists to look at something, they're never going to get any kind of evidence, let alone extraordinary. So it kind of turns into like an oxymoronic circle where you're not allowed to study something because there's no extraordinary evidence. How do you get the extraordinary evidence? By funding to be allowed to study it.
There's an enormous amount of ridicule, stigma, taboo attached to the UAP subject. Mm-hmm. Why?
I think that if we look at the history of science, there's nothing new about that. Meteorites, germs, atoms, all had stigma and taboo. And the reason is because we always think we've already solved everything. And we as a species have this hubris where we think there's no new science and there's no new engineering. This has happened before. In the 1890s, famous scientists said, we're done. And then all of a sudden comes relativity and quantum mechanics. At one point, the U.S. Patent Office, I don't know if this is an apocryphal story or really happened, said, oh, we might as well close the patent office because there are no new patents. This was over a century ago. And so I think we always think we're done. And right when we think we're done, there's a whole bunch more to discover.
So it's wrong for science to be dismissive of the UAP mystery.
Yes, I think that that's wrong because you can't dismiss something without looking at the evidence and without being allowed to collect your own evidence and get more evidence. Because how can you dismiss something as nonsense before you're even giving people a chance to present the existing body of work?
Okay, so let's apply the scientific method to some examples. We're very interested in Arizona because it's been a hotspot for sightings of anomalous objects at times. There's been a spate of military pilots in particular in sensitive, restricted training areas reporting unusual objects doing extraordinary things, doing Mach 7.75, like very high speeds at very high altitude, 36,000 feet. And they're dismissed often as drones. Do you find the drone explanation very satisfying?
No, I don't, because we have these stories, except they're more than stories. They'll often have data, they'll have video of objects that are going faster than our drones are capable of, than drones from other countries we know of, and at the wrong altitude above which we know drones have difficulty operating. So I don't think that explanation can make everything go away. I think it's a bit of a cop-out many times.
So let's set the scene in Arizona before we go to specific videos. What can you tell me about what characterizes Arizona? Well, obviously there's the military training ranges, it's a huge military training area. Can you set the scene for us about these videos and put them in context with what else we know has been going on from the U.S.S. Nimitz episode and the training ranges across the United States? I'm particularly interested in the phenomenon of UFOs seen over the Palo Verde nuclear site in Arizona, over military training ranges. Set the scene for me. Paint me a picture of Arizona and why it's significant.
So we've got in the Arizona, we have, it's near Mexico, of course, so you have a lot of patrols, border security, and so you have opportunity to catch things. You've got the desert where you don't have, you've got rural areas, you've got desert areas where you're not going to have planes and drones. You may have military hardware. You know, as you pointed out, we have military test ranges. They're sort of set out far away from the city. But also you're going to have trained military pilots or Department of Homeland Security, border security, things like that, who know what the mundane objects look like and know also what U.S. military hardware look like. And in the middle of the night, they'll spot objects that don't conform to things that they normally see out there.
And the cool thing I think is really interesting is ever since the Nimitz incident, this new phased array radar that we have, a much better type of radar system. Are you able to speak to why that's different from what we know of the old types of radar?
So yeah, we're always advancing our technology where we have better position and speed resolution with our better technologies. And we use our new technologies both in radar as well as in infrared. We've also got forward-looking infrared, and we have all these technologies allow us to see beyond what the human eye can see. And so I think that this is one of the reasons why we have more UAP reports is not because, you know, we have software glitches, that's always the excuse, but rather I think we are enhancing what we can see beyond what just the human eye can see.
So we're seeing things that have probably been there all along.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
So let's go to some of these. An A10 Warthog aircraft has this weird object hovering around it. What can you tell me about that?
It's so hard to tell from this one video what it is that we're seeing. But the thing is, videos don't just stand on their own. We also have the corroborating story of not just regular witnesses, but military people who are trained to identify foreign aircraft, and yet are seeing objects that sometimes trail them, buzz their plane, and they can't identify it. Their radar systems, their computer systems, they're designed to identify civilian aircraft, to identify Russian, Chinese, and other countries' hardware that they're flying around, and yet they're not able to identify some of these objects that are violating military airspace on a regular basis.
So There are huge airspaces in Arizona. There's the Luke Air Force Base, there's the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. They're major training areas for US fighter pilots, including the A10 pilots. And there's training ranges adjacent to these that are absolutely massive. And what fascinates me is there's been a succession of reports that have come into the Federal Aviation Administration from pilots, from military pilots, raising concerns about objects that in one case has actually hit the plexiglass cockpit window of F-16. Are they drones? Could it just be that they're simply commercial drones?
I think that's very unlikely. First of all, it would be illegal to operate military airspace, but some of the incidents, like this alleged mid-air collision, that is very serious, and that's going to be at an altitude that really most commercial, even military-grade drones are not going to be able to operate.
I mean, there's one here. April the 22nd, April 22, so April 2022, an F-35 pilot reports 8 silvery unidentified objects at 16,000 and 20,000 feet. I mean, they're concerned enough about it to report it to the Federal Aviation Administration. There's clearly something getting into training areas that's raising a concern among pilots.
That's right, something's going on, and we really have to ask ourselves, would a foreign country have the technology to see some of the behaviors and maneuvers we've been seeing, unusual high speeds and turns? If it is a country of human beings, is it Russia? Is it China? If so, why haven't they already overrun, Ukraine, Taiwan, etc.? It seems really implausible to chalk up every UAP to some human technology, to some foreign actor, violating U.S. airspace with impunity.
So let's talk about the A10 incident.
Yes.
Are you able to speak about this with any specificity? What conclusion can we come to about this case?
In this case, it's really hard to come to any conclusion because we've got the cameras clearly moving around, the planes moving around, and we just have a small collection of pixels. So it's extremely hard to judge if we've got something genuinely anomalous in this particular case.
I mean, it's tempting to conclude that that little object, whatever it is at the same distance from the camera as the aircraft. But we don't know that, do we?
We don't know that in this particular case. In many videos, it's hard to say when you only have one point of view. It's really hard to say if you've got a large object far away or a small object close up. And so that's always the challenge with these types of videos, is that we need more information, more of the metadata. It's good to combine video with radar and other information where possible. It's really hard for me to declare that this is something anomalous versus a bird or drone or a plane in this particular instance.
Okay, so La Bruja, the witch, it was captured in, I think, February 2020 using a mobile scope truck. So it's a truck on the ground using what looks like a FLIR imaging system. Okay, so there it is, whatever it is. What can you say about that?
Well, it's a very strange shape. I don't see any wings. I also don't see any propellant.
Couldn't it just be a balloon?
It could be, but I think if we check the wind speed at the time in the area, I don't think that this is moving along with the wind. It's hard to just write this off as a balloon or cluster of balloons. And where did it come from here in the middle of the desert?
It seems to be moving under some kind of apparent control.
Yeah, or it could also be there's so much we don't understand still about the atmosphere, and that's another one of the reasons I'm so interested in UAP. Sometimes it's not necessarily technological craft of some sort, but there could also be atmospheric sprites and sorts of atmospheric phenomena that we don't understand when you've got, extreme differences in temperatures in different areas like in the desert.
Sure.
But whatever it is, I think it's worth figuring it out rather than being dismissive. I sometimes worry that we've lost our sense of wonder and curiosity. And I want to figure out what this is. Even if it is just a balloon, I want to know that.
Well, Rich Hoffman was telling us from SCU that back in the 1960s and 70s when he was doing work, he was actually working at times alongside US Air Force Project Blue Book investigators. The military was collaborating with civilian organizations to try and investigate the phenomenon.
Yes, and I think in this particular case, I believe the name is means the witch, but that I think gives me an opportunity to say that I don't think that we're dealing with, in most cases at least, that I'm thinking about in terms of UAP, anything that's paranormal. To me, that word is abused, and paranormal is probably just a word for normal we haven't figured out yet. Anything exists is normal.
Yeah.
That's right. I think that we are dealing with something that can be studied. We can come up with hypotheses, and we can test our hypotheses with the scientific method.
Why is La Bruja potentially an anomalous object?
Well, we have an object here moving along at a steady clip in the desert, and it's got a shape that doesn't immediately seem to conform, given the resolution we have, at least of the video. It doesn't seem to conform to the shape of a drone or a plane or anything that should be out in the desert at that time, or anything of human manufacture. It doesn't quite have that shape.
Can we say if it's hot or cold here?
So most FLIR cameras have two different modes, where white, it could be very hot or it could mean very cold. So it's hard to say. In this particular video, we don't know what the exact mode is. It's either very, very hot or very, very cold. It's definitely very different than the temperature of the surrounding environment. So because the cows here are black, this suggests that the camera is in a mode where black is hot, which means that the potentially anomalous object here is very cold. And that's strange, because if it's an animal, it should be warm. It should be, even if it's cold-blooded, it's going to show up as warm.
And if it was a machine, you'd expect it to be hot as well.
Yes, because you'd expect some kind of exhaust or propellant. And so the temperature of this object, as well as its shape, suggests that this is something worth studying and trying to explain.
So potentially anomalous.
Exactly, because of the temperature and the shape.
So the rubber duck. We know that it was 2019 when it was caught. What can you tell me about the rubber duck? Why is it interesting scientifically?
Well, the temperature is unusual because we have here a situation where the camera is in the mode where white is not hot, but rather cold. And so that's unusual, because if you have an animal, like a bird, for example, or a mammal, or even a cold-blooded animal, is typically going to show up as warmer, not colder than the environment.
So you'd expect it to be black if it was hot.
That's correct. So it's important to keep in mind that these cameras have two modes. And so that's why it's important to look at the metadata. And an analysis has been made by Peter Reali of the Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, the SCU. And in this particular video, in the mode that it's in at the shooting that we're looking at here, white is designated cold. And that's unusual because animals should be warm, and also technology would typically also be warm because you'd have some kind of exhaust.
And you don't see any kind of propulsion system here. It seems to be moving under speed.
That's right. And the only kind of thing that happened to is you could have a balloon or paper floating in the wind, but we can look up the day and time of this video. We have the metadata. The SCU has done this in their analysis, and this object is moving against the wind and is moving at velocities faster than the wind, which makes it unlikely to be a balloon.
Against the wind.
Against the wind.
Which implies it's got its own propulsion system.
That's right, but we don't see in the video sort of a hot trail that you'd see from an artificial system that has some sort of propulsion behind it.
Couldn't the apparent high speed we see here, though, just be a parallax effect, because we know the aircraft or whatever it is that's filming it is moving as well?
Yes, so the speed is not unusual by being particularly high, but rather by being against the wind and higher than the wind.
Right.
So this is not a case where we can claim, a supersonic or hypersonic UAP or anything like that. But just because the speed isn't something enormous doesn't mean it's not anomalous. The temperature
if it was just a balloon, I mean, the common thing is for people to say it's just a balloon. Mm-hmm. And if it was just a balloon, well, you'd be looking for evidence for where the wind is, and it's clearly going against the wind, so it's got some kind of propulsion system.
That's right, and so it's unlikely to be a balloon. And we need to keep in mind that the context of this video, that we have men and women who are trained to look for things like drug cartels doing smuggling and look for illegal immigrants doing border crossings. So they know they've surely encountered the detritus of balloons and other objects, and so clearly they have those control cases under their belts. Why would they mistake a mundane or prosaic object like that for something anomalous?
And the reason why this video was leaked is because they clearly felt it was anomalous.
Exactly. And so, of course, they're going to see balloons, and they're going to see drones, and they're going to see animals, they're going to see birds, and over time, the operators, people who work for border security and U.S. Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security, why do we not trust that they get some modicum of training, surely, and they are going to recognize mundane and prosaic phenomena?
Why does this matter? Why do we need to know?
We need to know what's in our airspace and in the oceans and along the ground. Because if it's not American or American-made, and someone or something is penetrating our airspace and violating our national borders with impunity, how can we not care about what that is?
So David Grush, the US Air Force whistleblower, has suggested that he's got evidence of a hidden retrieval program of non-human technology. We know that there have been allegations of retrievals of non-human craft in the Arizona area. Do you find it plausible that there could be a reverse engineering program underway? And do you think that what we're seeing here might explain some of this phenomena? Could there be some kind of black military program that we don't know about?
I do think that a black military program of a huge leap in technology is possible, but I'm skeptical of that explanation, probably even more of some of the more speculative ones. And it's because if the U.S. had some of the amazing technology that we've seen some perhaps modicum of evidence of, if not in these videos and the Nimitz and all these famous cases, then if that's the case, why is the U.S. not using this? Why have we lost wars? Why did we lose Afghanistan? Why did we lose Vietnam? Why aren't we secretly helping Ukraine with this? Why don't we use it? If you look at American history and history of any country, if you have a secret technology, you eventually use it.
Sure.
It's eventually known that you've got the U-2 spy plane, for example. So there's historical precedence for this.
But they did keep the U-2 spy plane very secret for very many years.
That's true. But with some of the maneuvers we see UAPs doing, you wouldn't need just one leap in technology. You'd need, frankly, several. And it just seems bizarre that we would have that. Now, you mentioned reverse engineering. Could there be some sort of non-human tech that we reverse engineer? Now, I'm really skeptical of this for several reasons. I think it's plausible. I do think that David Grush's claims need to be examined because it's plausible. But I wonder if there is an advanced civilization, why would they be crashing as often as is alleged? And I also think if there is a crash retrieval program, I doubt we would make any progress, because if there is some sort of intelligence greater than humans, they could be thousands, millions, they could be billions of years more advanced than us. We might not make any progress with that.
If there have been retrievals, the Kingman case from 1953, for example, involved allegedly the retrieval of 3 disc-shaped objects from the desert that were somehow retrieved allegedly by the US military and secreted away. Do you find it plausible, the possibility that there might be some kind of base, some kind of underground base in the region of Arizona that's being used to hide such technology and reverse engineer it?
Well, I think that we wouldn't make very much progress, as I said, in reverse engineering, because I think if there are technologies out there that are from some sort of non-human intelligence, they could be from another star system and way ahead of us. So I think it's plausible that there's an attempt at such a program, but I'm skeptical we've made any real progress.
How tight is the world that you're in of physics? I mean, you're talking about nuts and bolts physics.
Yes.
So there are a lot of people who are trained in nuts and bolts physics at universities all around the United States. If there was this kind of secret parallel program going on, don't you think we'd know about it? Wouldn't you know that physicist colleagues of yours had suddenly disappeared off and weren't accounted for what they're actually doing in their research?
Yes, and I think there's precedent for this. There's the Manhattan Project, for example. And so I think what's happening is, this is again why, even though it's plausible, I'm still a bit skeptical. Now, I think Grush is reporting what he's heard secondhand. He doesn't have the firsthand evidence himself. So I have no doubt, or very little doubt in my mind, that he is very sincere. But I'm still skeptical of a large-scale program, because how could you hide this from scientists? So I think one possibility, one very scary possibility in my opinion, is they haven't hired enough scientists. And so the problem is that we're not making progress, if there is such a program, because people like me and my colleagues are kept in the dark, which then reinforces the stigma and taboo, because, oh, there's no such program.
Because good science is about sharing ideas.
That's right.
And testing each other's theories.
Exactly. So I think that if the U.S. government has a crash retrieval program, as has been alleged, I think if they want to make real progress, they're going to have to tone down the classification and allow more scientists to work on it, because they're not going to make real progress. If you look at historical examples like the Manhattan Project, if it had been only 10 scientists, we wouldn't have built the atomic bomb. We wouldn't have made progress as quickly as we did.
Locals in Sedona, the little town in Arizona, suggest that there's a weird activity going on. There are areas that are meant to be open public land where people have been confronted by men with guns dressed in paramilitary uniforms telling them to get out of the area or they will be killed. There's a suspicion in the local community that there is some kind of base adjacent to this little town in Arizona. And interestingly, it's not that far away from these training areas where these objects are being seen. Do you find it plausible that there could be a possible hidden base near the town of Sedona?
Well, there would need to be a money trail, a paper trail somehow. And if there is such a base, it's happening illegally without congressional oversight in the United States. And I think that's wrong. I think that we are potentially redirecting funds to secret projects that are not officially on the books. And people's rights are being violated. If they're being approached by people telling them to leave, but there's no signage, official signage that says an area has been, seized, for example, by eminent domain by the U.S. government, then people have no right to tell people that. So I think it's plausible that we have black ops projects. That's probably more plausible than aliens or some other non-human intelligence. But then I wonder, why is the U.S. not then using this great technology if we have these great new aircraft? Why aren't we using that in order to further the U.S.'s goals?
Maybe we're holding it back for the next confrontation with our potential foreign adversaries.
But then why are we not using our best pilots? Why do we have, Ryan Graves and we have Commander David Fravor talking about their encounters? Why are they the ones flying these things? It doesn't make sense. If it's artificially remote controlled, where are the remote control operators coming forward? Nobody has come forward and said, I was the pilot of the Tic Tac or the Gimbal or the Rubber Duck.
What we do know is somebody is wanting to hide something in the barren wasteland just to the west of Sedona.
And what is that? I want to know.
Okay, so we don't know a huge amount about the circumstances of this video, but we do know that this particular object, the cigar, it was shot off a monitor in an aircraft in the same area as the Rubber Duck.
Well, this is very interesting because I don't see any wings or propellers, but it's very hard to judge because we're seeing a video of a video. And so it's going to make it extremely hard to come to any solid conclusions. But what's immediately strange is I don't see any traditional aerodynamic surfaces, and yet this thing seems to be moving along at a decent pace here. I do see what appears to be there could be some propellant, which would suggest it is some sort of more mundane human-made object, because if you look carefully, there does seem to be some sort of trail, but it's hard to tell whether that's a trail from, from propellant, from a propulsion system, or maybe it's just an artifact of the camera system where it's just an after image of where the object has been. So it's really hard to tell, since we're looking here at a video of a video, so it's extremely hard to judge without more context and metadata of whether this is legitimately anomalous or not. But I'm intrigued.
It is an intriguing object, isn't it? There's no visible means of propulsion there.
I don't see any wings, and I can't tell if the trail behind it is propellant from a propulsion system, or is it just after?
Could it be a missile of some kind?
If it is, who fired it? Is this a missile test? Could this be a missile test if it's in the same area in Arizona where we might have a military base, a testing range? But again, why is this being filmed then? Is this being considered anomalous by by whoever is filming it? Aren't the people filming it the ones who would know if there's a missile being launched?
I was about to say, if it was a missile test, what on earth was an aircraft doing in the area at the time?
Exactly. You would have rules about what can be in the air at the time.
Welcome, Rich.
Hey, how you doing? Good to see you again, Ross.
Looking forward to talking to you about these videos, my friend.
Oh, by all means, may I have a seat?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
So let's get into it.
Sure.
Rich, tell me who you are and what your qualifications, what your expertise is in doing the kind of analysis we're going to ask you to do.
Sure. Well, first off, let me establish my career. My career has been in the IT world, and I'm working at the Redstone Arsenal. I'm working for the Army Material Command, which is the headquarters for all the logistics aspects associated with the Army. The bullets, the weapons, and everything else is produced through there.
Do they know about your obsession with UAPs, UFOs?
They do. In fact, the really joke over there at the building is that I'm the command ufologist. So they've taken it, that I'm the command. In fact, a lot of people on the Redstone know, I guess, from the shows that I've been on and things like that I'm the UFO guy on
So they
Redstone.
Tolerate your interest in UAPs?
Sure.
They're not trying to discourage you?
Oh, in fact, no. What's happening now is that everybody's walking up and telling me their stories. So there's more water cooler talks than we've had previously, and as a result of the 2017 change that took place. And so now I'm hearing incredible cases and things like that.
So that's actually very positive. There's no sign of a
positive.
cover-up. You don't have commanders telling you
No.
you can't talk about this stuff.
Not at all. Not at all. Plus I'm a defense contractor. I'm not actually an employee of a civilian, within the Army Material Command.
Sure. And so you work in the military as a
Yes.
contractor. What is your expertise in doing UAP investigations?
Well, let me first start off where I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, which was right next to where Project Blue Book was going on. I started in 1964 with this whole subject. I was 13 years old. I had to do a book report, which I failed miserably on the subject, and wasn't really interested in it. But then what happened to me was that I found out when I went home that evening, Walter Cronkite was on the news talking about a case in Socorro, New Mexico. And when I listened to that, I was like, wow, this is pretty incredible. It involved the police officer, credible, and a whole bunch of other things that were seen on the ground, footprints and that. And I thought, that's rather incredible. A couple days later, I picked up my first legitimate book on the subject, which was the report on unidentified flying objects by the former head of Project Blue Book, Captain Edward Ruppel. I read it, and it was like, wow, this is incredible. Suddenly, at age 13, my life transformed, and I became obsessed with the topic, right? I began collecting as much as I could in the information world about it. By age 15, I was on Phil Donahue talking about the subject, who was a well-known journalist as well, or had his own show, which propelled me to become like the local guy on UFOs, even in Dayton, Ohio, with the project just up the road. So I began at an early age investigating the phenomenon, and I was getting reports. My name was at every police station around the city of Dayton. Day and night, I was getting called to go out and to do investigations.
Were there times when you found yourself doing investigations the same time as the Project Blue Book investigators?
I had many cases where I had a Blue Book officer sitting next to me, and we were doing the same case.
It's another era, that, isn't it? That era when
Whole
the
other-
Air Force was openly
Yes.
investigating
Yes.
UFOs, UAPs.
Yes, it was. And it was remarkable because it was because of those relationships of me sitting in the same seat that eventually I was able to get connected with Project Blue Book. And in fact, they provided me the phone number for the radar approach control that I could use in my investigations and say, hey, what do you have up in that area? And certainly if it were classified, they wouldn't do that, you know.
So
But if
how
it were
many
unclassified-
years experience do you have? I understand you now work for MUFON, which is the Mutual UFO Network. You're like one of their lead investigators.
I was.
You were.
Yeah, in 2017, I left my roles with MUFON, but I had been with them since 1969. So for all those periods of times, I played critical roles within that. I was the state section director when I was in Dayton. When I came to Alabama, I ended up being the state director here. I was also the state director for Mississippi, and so all of the investigators and cases came in to me, and I would be, putting an analysis. But I also then moved up to being the deputy director of investigations, the STAR team manager, which is a rather elite group of people that go very quickly out to the scene, but Bigelow also was using them. And then I also became, and in the end, looking at technology tools that we could be able to apply to move on. 2017, I left. We created the SCU.
So explain who
so
the
now-
SCU are.
The SCU is a group of, we started off with 5 of us, and from the 5, now we're over 300 people, primarily composed of science or science-minded individuals from every discipline that all want to be able to study and create papers, write papers, get them into journals and various other things, and do our analysis and study of all the legitimately good, credible cases that have a lot of data. And let me stress that. We're not going to be spending our time looking at just, Joe Smuffy who took a video on his camera. We're looking at the cases that need and warrant, like in the Aguadilla case, we took 2 years. In the Nimitz case, 2 years. And we've analyzed those cases using physics and all the tools of science to be able to help us to understand that. And we craft a paper or a report, and we publish it and make it transparent. We take all the best cases, the ones with actual good, solid sensory data or some other kind of data that we can actually go after and really study.
So SCU is the Scientific Coalition for the Study of UAPs, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena.
That's correct. We started off with ufology, but we changed that term when everybody else did. And we're a coalition, let me stress that. We're looking to be able to partner with a lot of organizations and others, and we've been doing that.
So you're not necessarily UFO believers per se, you're entering into this with a completely objective scientific detachment.
Correct. Yeah, you look and you follow data, and that's where we tend to go. Where's the data at? We don't get into many of the other extremes, talking about conspiracies often and various other things like that. We just focus on the objects and what can science tell us about the objects and the nature of them.
So just explain to me, how do you investigate something like UAPs? I mean, by definition, they're anomalous, they're unidentified. Sure. I mean, you've got how many years of experience investigating the phenomenon? Sure. How do you begin doing it?
Yeah, well, after 60 years, you've heard everything, right? I mean, every story you can possibly imagine. I've investigated over thousands of cases, many thousands, over that period of time. And so you start to see where the general public has a tendency to always, they're not very familiar with what's up in the sky. Okay, they spend time with their phones, but they're not necessarily looking up and studying what's up there. And over a period of time, we've seen more and more in terms of instances where we're putting up things like drones, which we didn't have previously, and a whole variety of other things, and natural phenomena that are up there that we are just now understanding, like sprites, for example, within the last decade. So the challenge is that many people misperceive these. And so what we saw from even investigating cases, that we could explain 70 to 80% of the cases that were reported by people.
Sure.
Okay, it's and then there's the issue of the human factor, which comes into play, where memory and vision and all those things impact the quality of the case.
I was going to ask, Are human beings very good witnesses when it comes to UAPs?
They're what we consider to be data points. And the reason being is because of the concerns where they do not. I was on a case in Ohio in the 70s where I was called and 30 people were out observing an object. I brought 30 people into a room, gave them crayons and or paper and various other things, and said, "Can please tell me that, and also tell me about your report. What did you see?" I heard 30 different objects happening. Okay, so going back to the point where if I'm wanting to look at it and get the real truth behind it, I'm going to have a problem with that. I've got to sort through and now average out what people saw.
So human beings, from what I take from what you're saying,
Yes.
we're not very good witnesses.
That's correct. And if you take a look at the instances where people who are convicted and now released from prison after we do DNA, or if you look at an accident and you find out that an accident happened, many people don't catch all the details. And so the same is true about the UFO.
But let's just start from basics.
Yeah.
Is witness evidence evidence at all?
From the science standpoint, again, it's a data point. We don't say it's not, we're going to rest our case on the basis of a human observation. We're looking at human coupled with the fact that we get more clear data or information from cameras like sensors and various other things that we can use and help us to understand the phenomena.
So what you're often looking for, you're looking for multiple data points.
Correct.
So you've got the human eyeball
Yes.
looking at an object in the sky. And
We
so
have
what
radar.
else are you looking for?
Radar, we're looking if there was in the water, it might be sonar, it might be auditory. You had a cell phone where you were, and you caught it auditorially.
Well, let's deal with cell
or
phones
something.
for a moment.
Go ahead.
I'm sick of the number of cell phone videos I get
Yes.
sent where people are really excited about
Yeah.
what they've seen.
Yeah.
They've obviously seen something much better with their
Yeah.
Trade One human eyeball,
Yeah.
because what they're sending me is a blurry, vague, opaque object sitting in the sky. It shows me nothing.
Exactly. And
How
that's-
much use are those videos?
So that is a key problem. It's been like that, you know. Remember in the early days, even you had people with Brownie cameras, you know, and twins lens reflex cameras and various other things that were not adequately able to capture the object. So you also come into the situation where you might have, you know, blurry images as a result of the field or a possible field around the craft, which is causing blurriness. Most people will also see things at night, and you know, and that's where we run into another problem. The problem is that it's, you know, now it's just a light we're looking at, and what can we tell from a light? Nothing. So if we had a daylight sighting, obviously the camera could tell us more details and things like that. So the general public are using their cell phones to capture something which is validating that they might have had an experience at that time in that place, all right? So for them, it's good. But for science, it's not good because we're just getting a blurry image of a light and we can't tell anything about it.
Right.
We
So
don't learn anything.
why is the 2017 explanation of the Nimitz incident from 2004, why was that series of military sightings and the publicity about those particular sightings so important in the study of UAPs?
Well, first off, let me clarify that we read about it in a Fighter Suite magazine in 2015. So it's even preceded the announcement. So we were already on it right around the 2015 time period. The fact that the Commander Fravor had this experience, it was written up. So we began looking into that.
The 2004 Nimitz incident
Yeah.
became a cause célèbre for the issue of UAP studies.
It did.
Why?
I think for one, it became a situation where, you know, you have a pilot who is very extremely credible. Commander Fravor is well known as among the aces. He is a very credible individual that came forward and talked about his incident. Couple that with the fact that we then learned that it was aboard an exercise that was off of the West Coast, right? And that we also found out that other people had seen it. And so we started looking at and actually interviewing at least 18 people who were aboard either the Princeton or they were aboard the aircraft or who played in on that whole encounter. So now we've got human testimony coupled with the fact that we've got now eyeballs from pilots that are in F-18s that are now heading out to there. Plus you have the latest technology from the Spy-1 radar that we had, which as is expensive equipment, you know. I mean, millions of dollars to be able to have this. And you have validation from multiple points that during the course of that week, you had these kind of a dropping of these aircraft, and on one account, you had merge plot of the object with the fact that Commander Fravor was now getting there along with the other F-18 aircraft. And so now you have a lot of different details. Plus you have the later, the capture of the video of the Tic Tac, which you could then take a look at and start to analyze. And so you learn things like, well, in fact, they actually timed the object dropping from 20,000 feet, stopping above the water in less than 1 second. Right?
It was 0.78 of a second, wasn't it?
0.78 of a second.
That was something in one of your reports.
Yes.
That was a moment for me when I was writing my book where I really sat up because you did the calculations at SCU about how fast that object must have moved in order to move from that high to just above the surface of the ocean in 0.78 of a second. How fast was it?
Well, it was roughly, it was Mach 50 and above. Okay, so Mach 50, right? Hypersonic is Mach 5. We are now talking about something that is exponentially higher.
How many thousands of kilometers an hour or miles an hour?
Well, miles per hour is 144,000 miles.
144,000 miles an hour.
So,
but crucially, the important thing is, that's not speculative.
No,
this is data.
Yes.
And that was the turning point.
That's correct. And and so what you see is an object that doesn't create a sonic boom, doesn't release kinetic energy, which you'd expect would be the equivalent of like the Hoover Dam, you know, for a year. I mean, so these are all calculations you do. At the same time, you're talking about an object that is not apparently heating up, has no control surfaces on it, no nothing.
So there's no visible means of propulsion.
That's correct. But at one point, you had Commander Slate, who's in the upper berth F-18, who also describes the fact that when it came up after the circle dance that Commander Fravor did and came up and then shot off to the cap point, at that point, he got a good look at it, and there was like a mirage-like effect around the craft. So going back to the idea about the field, there's potentially a field around these objects that's interacting with our atmosphere. And so that might cause the blurriness that I was talking about.
And so the crucial point here, the lesson from the 2004 Nimitz incident, which I suspect is the defining UAP incident for the last 20 years, that incident's important because of the multiple data streams. You had the A1 human eyeball being confirmed by radar, IR systems, a specific type of radar called phased array radar. Can you explain what phased array radar is? Because it's the same radar that's used on some of the technology that we're going to be talking about a bit later.
Yeah, so bottom line is the phased radar has, if you think about the typical radar sweep, let me go around with the radar and it's the primary radar is trying to capture it. This is something that is actually going at a much quicker rate, capturing actually the entire field of anything that's up there, and is able to then interpret it and put it into a more, it's like me taking and going from 780, 720p video to suddenly I'm now at 4K and 8K. So you're suddenly getting a better resolution and you're getting that you're able to capture every single aspect of that trajectory.
Now
we're using it for missiles. We have to, as our defense.
Back in 2004, the phased array radar was relatively new, wasn't it?
That's correct, yes.
But in the intervening 20 years, it's now been put onto our top fighter jets, hasn't it?
Correct. So for example, in 2014 and 2015, now you've even advanced in terms of that technology, and suddenly Ryan Graves is now picking on the AESA, he's picking up 30 objects that are up there that his phased radar can now pick up, and we're now starting to see them. Yeah.
Now, I don't want to be too generalized, but we're doing a sort of a quick summary here of what's been seen, what's been happening that's anomalous, that the military particularly has picked up on in the last 20 years.
Sure.
And what I find interesting is if you go from left to right across the continental USA, you've got 2004, you've got the Nimitz incident, and in the same area in 2019, you've got other sightings of anomalous objects over Navy vessels that have still not been properly explained, that were called drones. Then you move through the United States, and there's a lot happening in training areas, military training areas over Arizona, New Mexico. And then you follow the band across to the East Coast. A lot of these military sightings are happening in known, restricted military training areas, aren't they?
That's right.
Why?
So let me introduce it to you this way. So the FAA has now approved flights of drones, right? What are these things? We're all thinking of maybe the small little DJI kind of like Mavic. In fact, I fly a drone. I've got one myself, right? That object, I can send it up to 16,000 feet. So it can go up quite high. It's running on a battery. It's very immature. One of the things we know is that other countries are also looking at drones. You hear about them all the time in Ukraine. You hear about them in other parts of the world. And so consequently, what's happened, the drone technology, much like the aircraft technology, has improved very quickly. And so suddenly we don't have just battery operated. I don't need to bring it back. I can now we've got, we also have the Predators, the larger ones we've been flying that look like the little aircraft, And now we're getting into autonomous, actually craft. Like if you take a look at the spy craft that we send up at the same time that looks like the shuttle, that's autonomously flown.
The thing I find interesting though, Rich, is we're constantly being told that these things are drones. I mean, the military's using the term drones, but what's the evidence that they are?
Well, we do know that there are drones that are doing this.
Right.
Okay. So let me clarify to you that I'm working a project over on the Arsenal for the Army segment, and I'm the spectrum manager for a drone killing project. So in other words, we're using countermeasure small UAS. I'm sure you've heard that term, but we're actually putting in measures to be able to knock them out of the sky, because we're seeing an increasing number of drones in the United States. From FAA is also reporting them more frequently around airports. And so we have a problem where people are sending up drones, wanting to take pictures and do other things, which we don't understand what the motive or the intent is, and we have to know. So we're actually putting in measures to be able to knock them out of the sky and to find out where the operators are. So that is part of the equation. Couple that with the fact that you've always had an interest by unknown objects, or UAP, which you can't distinguish many times because they look like and they move like, or quickly, or something like that, that people interpret from a human standpoint that they see it being very similar. So you'll hear people call a drone a UFO. I have people here in the city of Huntsville that are taking and making and modifying drones to make them look like UFOs.
Yeah.
Right?
Why do people do that?
For fun.
Yeah.
They get a kick out of the fact that it's being reported as a UFO. I had one guy in my house telling me he's doing that, not knowing that I'm the state director for UFO investigations for Alabama.
I hope you throttled him.
I said, can you please tell me when you're going to be flying? Where? Right. So you got an example of where people utilize that to be able to create cases.
Can I ask you this though?
Sure, go ahead.
Do drones that are known to be drones explain all of the phenomena that we're seeing?
No.
So what's going on?
So we have a situation where there's always been a phenomena, right? It goes back. If you look at the capabilities of the UAP back in the 40s and 50s, right? They really haven't changed. That doesn't matter about the size of the object. They all can move with the same kind of capability, and they've always been present. So now you have drones thrown into the mix. You have to discern between what's a drone and what is this object, and you need to know that. And that's why the military has to get to the point of making that discernment to be able to protect its interests.
So is it possible that it's not like this is suddenly new? These have always been here.
The object,
Yeah.
UAP? Yes.
So
They've always been
these
there.
sightings that we're seeing at the
Yeah.
moment, they've been seen over decades, even before drone technology was developed.
Oh, clearly, yes. I mean, what I'm trying to tell you is that, if you looked at the Nimitz, the dropping from 20,000 feet to stopping at sea level, that would also be back in the 50s. We had nothing like that in the 50s.
And these are solid objects,
Yeah, but we're talking about solid objects.
detected on radar,
Detected on radar, tracked, chased, shot at,
and we don't know what they are.
and we don't know what they are. And so finally, we are now getting to the point where the government is actually taking it seriously. There is an investigative body that's actually going and doing that. The Air Force, if you look at their study over the period of the years that they did the Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, you will find out that they couldn't explain 30% of the cases that they had.
Let's go to the specific incidents we're talking about here. From around about 2019 through to the present day, there's been a series of anomalous objects sighted, mainly in military training areas, but also over civilian areas like suburban Phoenix, that have not been capable of prosaic explanation. Nobody knows quite what they are. But there's a consistent theme to them. They're often described as drones, but they're drones that are moving in some cases at Mach 0.75, that's 575 miles an hour,
That's correct.
or 926 kilometres an hour
That's right.
at 36,000 feet.
That's correct.
Do you know of any commercial or even military drone technology that is capable of doing what those objects are doing?
So altitude is not an issue, that you can have drones that can go that high. Speed's another thing. And length of time that they can be up in the air is another thing. So there's where you start to get into the point where you're making a discernment that says, well, maybe it's not necessarily a drone, but the human wants to put it into being a drone. They classify it. They call it whatever they want in their vernacular. And that's been an issue that we've had.
Right. So let's move to the first of the videos. There's one called the Apache, and we don't quite know the date of the incident. We know the footage was released in 2022. This is a night training exercise with an Apache helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
Talk me through it. What can you tell me about this incident?
Well, first off, you have a situation. I really, on this one, you have. I think that this is like below the Phoenix area. There's a actual pad down there where they do the exercises, military exercises with Apache helicopters. It's known for that, right? And so what you have is the Apache helicopters coming into its landing area, and it doesn't need a long runway, but this like little area is where you have that. You have a reticule in the middle, that's the crosshair. You'll see that, right? At the same time, you might have the bearing shown on the screen.
Is this the UAP here?
That's a UAP that's up in the air. One of the videos that I looked at, and I didn't recall looking at this one and investigating it for a show that I did, but they're sitting on the runway, and they capture these objects that are two objects actually. It's not just one object. It's moving through the sky off to the right, and it goes by, and then they move the camera toward that direction. And it could be that they had a helmet type of thing, but we don't know because I never talked to the pilots.
Right.
So the situation is that you then take a look at and determine where the angle was. You're also able to get a measure of the distance. You find out the direction it's going, and in this case, we found out that it matched birds in terms of the size of the image. At the same time, it matched the speed of a bird or birds, which are often commonly seen in thermal. And this is in the
So you think it's birds?
in my analysis of this, which I did, I tend to fall in the line with the idea that it's birds.
Okay. The weird thing about it is, I mean, Chris Leto, for example, who's a
Yes.
jet pilot, I mean, he's come out and said that he thinks that
Yeah.
there's something unusual about this. You see,
Sure.
you see three objects rotate around each other while maintaining an eastwards trajectory.
Yeah.
Just birds?
Yeah, birds do that. They're rotating around each other.
It's a more plausible explanation than a mechanical
well,
device.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
But he arrived at a conclusion that the objects were moving at Mach 1.28.
yeah, and when you can, so here's where you have to understand that, the closer an object is to you, the quicker it looks like it's moving.
Sure.
Right. So the distance matters. If it's at a far distance and it's moving across, then it's moving at a faster rate.
So that's
of
what's
speed.
called the parallax effect.
Well, parallax is about the fact that I'm now rotating around you and I'm seeing the background move. That's parallax. What we're talking about is knowing the actual position of where the object is and then determining how far it is and then what the distance that it covers in a period of time. And so with that, you can deduce anything. So if it were an object in front of you, let's say it was an insect in front of you, and it goes, well, that's moving rather quick, right? And if it's at a distance and it's doing the same kind of thing, like I'm miles away, you know that it's moving very quick.
So how did you conclude that they were birds that were closer to the camera than it first appeared?
So they maneuver the same way that birds do, number one. The objects do this kind of like dance and stuff like that around each other. You can look at the pixels, and this is where you get down into the individual level of the image, and you're looking at the cells of the image. And then you can look at some reference point, deduce size, and then you can come up with the idea that it's X number of pixels, and how big is the screen, and you're able to then determine the size and what that would match.
So
And then you can also use trigonometry, which I use trigonometry on.
This is where the human brain comes in it.
Yes.
We often fill in the gaps with our brains,
Sure we do.
don't we?
Yes.
So we see something, and there's a bit of a confirmation bias, isn't there, with the way we look at objects?
Very, very often. So what happens many times when we ever get a UFO video, if you take a look at the conversations that go on below, everybody speculates about what it is without doing any analysis, right? And they basically speculate. And so you go to different opinions, and if you have 10 different people, they'll have 10 different opinions. So is it different that Chris Lato had a different perspective on this than what I did? No. I mean, it's common. If you look at the Kenneth Arnold case back in 1947 that started this whole caboodle, there were at least 14 explanations for that people tried to come up with.
So let's deal with the Apache.
Yeah,
the
sure.
The 2017 Apache case, birds.
In my estimation, I believe that one is a natural explanation. Yes.
So then let's move on. There's another one in 2021, April 2021, A10. It's an A10 deployed from the Davis-Monthan Air Force Base.
Correct.
Tell me about that insert.
Yeah, the challenge with the video, number one, it gets a thermal image. You've got a ground-based FLIR camera that is now looking up. This is probably maybe about 20 miles away, and it has zoomed in on this, and they're picking up an object that looks like it's about the same thermal temperature as the aircraft.
Which means it's hot.
Which in this case, if you look at the settings, you'll see that it'll indicate like white hot, or in this case it's white would be hot, and in this case the black is hot on this, right? So that's why the aircraft appears to be black hot, okay? And so like a cold object would appear as being white.
White, right.
So this matches also with what that aircraft is.
Can you talk about the speed here?
Yeah, so the aircraft itself is going like roughly about, I think it was about 345 miles an hour. And it's going off and doing a trajectory, and then, and then it's going over this range. And you'll see it do a sweep where it does a big sweep here around. And so now keep in mind that this could be, it's about 20 miles away. So it's not like it's a big area that it's covering, but the A10 is moving around like this. And you have anything that's visible between the camera and the aircraft. So going back with the idea that, let's say you have an insect that's relatively close, you can actually pick up the image of an insect.
Could this be an insect?
So from looking at this video, I don't think that it was an insect. No, I think that it was potentially it could have been a balloon, or something of that nature.
How could a balloon be moving? How could a balloon be moving? It appears, at least, as fast as the A10.
But that's because we want to put the object at the same distance as the aircraft, And that's a valid, not valid assumption. Okay, this is where we run into problems here because
So we have no, but I'm just getting my understanding here. We have no way of proving that that object, whatever it is at the same point distance.
Correct.
From the camera.
We don't know, and because we don't know that, we derive this as being an inconclusive case. We say it's inconclusive because we don't have the information. I didn't talk to the pilot. I don't have any, or not the pilot, but I don't have information on the camera. I don't have information on a lot of other details that go on to help me to tell precisely what that blob is that's moving across the scene. I do know one thing, that it matches the temperature roughly about the aircraft. So it's apparently has some sort of heat associated with it.
So doesn't that rule it out being a balloon?
Well, let me clarify that balloons, depending upon the nature of what they're made from, gives a different reading. So for example, the weather balloons, which are more like the latex kind of balloons, will appear as more like translucent or not clear. If you have a mylar balloon, it can reflect the temperature of the ground and show as being dark. It can also show something above it being light.
So that can't rule it out being a balloon, basically.
Correct, yeah. So you have the problem with you when you're looking at a thermal image, in the IR range, you're looking at the fact that it's detecting not the actual object, but you're looking at the heat. And so we're looking at the heat of whatever that is that's coming and emitting toward the camera. And we have challenges with these kind of things.
So final decision, 2021 A10, conclusion?
Well, we don't have enough information and it's inconclusive.
Inconclusive.
We can't definitely prove either way that it's a natural object or it's an unnatural object.
So in the event that we could show that the object was at the same distance as the aircraft, would that change your conclusion?
Oh, sure. If we could actually validate that, let's say that the pilot observed it was behind him or something of that nature, if we had that opportunity, that's certainly going to give me a distance point because I could then look and say, well, he's equivalent to the aircraft. But we don't know. And the fact that things can be seen on cameras between the camera and the object or whatever we're filming, that creates a problem.
Now we go to February 2020,
Yes.
La Bruja,
Yes.
or the witch, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Tell me about that case.
So a very interesting experience. Again, it's a ground-mounted FLIR camera. Okay, it's not one that's off of an aircraft that's flying or a helicopter, which usually is the case. This is a ground-mounted, and it captures this unusual, very cold, in this case, because what you take a look at is black as hot, but this thing appears to be very, very white, which is indicating that it's, the contrast, the thermal contrast is that this is a very much colder object than you've got.
Now, it doesn't appear to be moving under any kind of propulsion system. Couldn't it just be a balloon?
Well, it's a lot of things that it could be, and one of them could be a balloon. However, let's go back to the fact that let's take a look at the wind speed on that day and at that time.
And you can do that because
we've got the metadata up there that tells me the date, the time, and I get the location, and I can now look at the weather and I say, well, wait a minute, there's no wind on that. So what's moving that? It's not going to be a balloon, it's going to be something else that's causing that to move, right? And if you take a look at it, it's moving at a relatively consistent speed. Okay?
Which is unusual. If
Yeah,
it was
so
just a balloon, it'd be moving around erratically.
Oh, without a doubt. If you ever watch balloons, like release balloons, Mylar, they move back and forth and jimmy and shake and do all different kinds of things as they're going up in the air. They're being hit by different winds at different altitudes. And so you don't see that here. It's also not like it's like a helium thing and it's rising. It's going horizontally, right?
Yeah, it's not changing altitude.
It's not changing in terms of its height.
Do you think it's under apparent control?
Yes, I do. I think that in this case, it was like whatever this thing was under some sort of control. But it has this extremely unusual shape in terms of its thermal image, meaning that if you looked at the A10 aircraft, right, you'll see that you could make out the wings, you can make out all the different control surfaces. You might even see heat coming out of the back end of the engine that shows up, right? So we're seeing the heat again.
Is this a bit of a
Here we don't
stretch?
see heat.
You might remember there was the Jeremy Corbell George Knapp object from the Middle East, which looked like some kind of humanoid object. Do you remember that object?
Yeah, I do.
It
It
was
was
a
like
weird object drifting around an army
I think
base.
a lot of people called it the squid or
The
something.
squid,
or something like
yeah.
that. You know?
It seems to be evocative of that. I mean, it could almost be like a spaceman with a pack on his back.
Yeah.
So what conclusions can we reach about this?
Well, in this case, it's basically like, once again, we have not talked with camera operators. We have not talked with a whole lot of other things. You could readily go and say that it's inconclusive because you really can't come up with it. I think that in this case, this one is an unknown, and it tends to fall into the more validated UAP that we can't understand.
So to go through why it's an unknown, there's no visible means of propulsion.
Correct.
It's moving under apparent control.
Yes.
What are the other things that distinguish it as a genuine UAP? Is that the two?
Well, I mean, it's probably those two. When we think of UAP, we tend to think of the fact that they most often are described as being that they shoot off in instantaneous acceleration in any direction, or they might make 90-degree turns, or something of that nature. And we know that we have things that can't make 90-degree turns, and we have got something that go from a standstill to instantaneous acceleration to Mach. So when we're looking for legitimate proof that's really going to make the case on anything, we're not looking for something that's going to go at a consistent rate of speed. Okay? Yep. We're looking for it to do something like a 90-degree turn or something like that. In this case, this doesn't do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's unknown because we just can't figure out what a rational explanation is for that. And we've looked at everything from the fact that you could have a bag that's got some sort of cold air in it, right? And that there might be a drone above it out of the range, and this is a payload that's on the bottom that's being moved on. But we don't see that in a lot of this. And so it's hard to make a determination as to what this really is.
So the 2020 La Bruja conclusion?
It's an unknown.
Unknown.
We just don't know what it is.
Moving on. Okay, so the rubber duck, as it's called, and it does look like a rubber duck. It's 2019.
Going back to the human, we tend to look at things and we want to put them into an image that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right? Our brain does that, right?
But it really does. I mean, it looks like one of those bath ducks. Could it be? I mean, could it be a giant
Could it be
party?
a rubber duck?
Yeah, could it be a giant party balloon or something like that?
Well, we certainly looked at that because you had a situation where if you take a look very carefully, there's a bigger section, and then there's almost like an attachment to it that going down to another thing. Mm-hmm. And so the question was, is this a balloon with a payload on it, right? It's moving across the sky. And so we're looking at it from the top. This was from an aircraft, that was looking down, and it was also doing a similar kind of maneuver in terms of circles as it was moving across. And this is being filmed for 45 minutes. Going back to if it's a drone, what kind of power is it using that lasts 45 minutes up in the air?
At what speed is it going here?
And it's a relatively slow speed because now what you've got here is, I think it's maybe less than 40 mile an hour. But you have the appearance of it moving very quickly because of parallax. This is the parallax notion. The plane is rotating around an object, right? And when you have that, the background's moving at that speed too. So now you're seeing the background moving at the speed of the aircraft. That's parallax.
Right.
And so you have to factor that in when you do any kind of an analysis of these kind of things, where you're looking at the position of it from basically the metadata on the screen, what's the bearing of the aircraft, what's the direction of the camera, what's its angle down to the ground, and then you're having to translate that and put that into, a lot of mathematics, by the way, to be able to do that. And that's why we put the report together, where we did the study on it, to try to do what math can we do on this thing.
What's that effect there? Do you know anything about what that phenomenon is where it flickers like that?
Yeah, I mean...
Some of the people commenting about the video online suggest that it might be some attempt at electro interference or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people want to make a lot of claims. Let's say we also look for evidence of that.
So you're being a good scientific skeptic
exactly.
here.
So there's also problems with camera that cause flicker.
Right.
So you have to look at that as well, right?
So take me to your
So-
conclusions about the rubber duck. What
So-
can you conclude?
So we again, it's one of those things where you try to like rationalize it, and you try to come up with the best conclusion based upon your analysis or your data. And in this case, we put together an extensive report for SCU, and Peter Reali was the main investigator for that. A number of us all also looked at it, and we come up with the fact that we have no rational explanation that we can come up with to explain how you can get this effect, what it would be doing, moving for this length of time. So it's kind of like one of those things where you do what they call a de-escalation of hypotheses. You start off with, let's see, what hypothesis can you make that it might be a bird, a plane, or whatever like that, and then you try to put that and match those facts with it, and you come down to the point where you can't. There's none of these that match it.
Right.
It's an unknown.
So, Rich, we've got an extra special surprise for you today, and it's
Oh,
a new
good.
video
All right.
that you haven't seen.
Okay.
And it's
Sure.
nicknamed The Cigar.
Yeah.
Well, it looks pretty blurry to me.
Yeah, exactly. And so is the metadata on the screen, which you can't make out at all. You have no way of determining, well, you might be able to determine. So the trees appear to be white as you're seeing this, which would indicate that in this case, this is a hotter object. So they set the setting on it as being white is
Cold.
yeah. So, or white, yeah. So what you have is, no, white is hot. Okay?
White is hot.
So let me clarify. Because we're filming a monitor, you don't have there's not good quality of the image. You can't tell anything. It's moving in a straight line. It appears to be that whatever this is, it's maybe cooler than the background in terms of the trees. It seems to be moving well, again, the parallax comes into play, so you don't know that. You can't really tell if it's, much in terms of the quality of that.
But obviously, just to explain, it looks like it's going incredibly fast,
Yeah.
zooming across a landscape.
Sure.
But you're saying the parallax.
Parallax has to be reduced. You have to, in every one of these cases, you have to look at the fact that the aircraft or whatever it is moving very quickly.
Yeah.
And so you have to know its speed in relative to what it's seeing.
But the significance of the fact that it's not showing as hot, but it seems to be operating under some kind of propulsion.
Yeah, but you also look, and there seems to be an effect following it, like a trail. And that could be the fact that it's got propulsion.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
Okay.
So there is a propulsion behind this. So then you have to question is, could this be a missile? It seems to be it's more like cylindrical.
Yep.
And it's got some sort of a field or something like that, or impact in the atmosphere that's being detected by the thermal. And so consequently, I would say that this is something that's, again, natural, that has potentially, like you're seeing the propulsion from it,
Sure.
which these objects don't have, and the unknowns don't have. I have no basis of knowing where this was, time of day,
We can't
or
tell you.
anything at all.
Yeah.
So this would be one of those ones we would come up and say it's inconclusive with likelihood of being a natural object that is not falling under the UAP.
Coming to a conclusion, out of the 5 videos we've looked at today, there's one that's potentially anomalous, but we need more information to make any kind of definitive conclusion.
Always. You have to have information from the actual either witnesses, or you got to have camera data that oftentimes you don't have. And you're looking at a video, and anything can be on a video.
The frustrating thing is that we do know from reports that have come in and that have been FOI'd from the FAA, it's clear that pilots in military training areas are reporting anomalous objects that they're seeing with their grade 1 human eyeball flying at extraordinary speeds and maneuvers around their aircraft.
Yes. And so going back to, if you take a look at the Fravor was an eyeball. That was daylight.
But even in the Arizona area that we're talking about,
Yeah.
there are FAA reports where drones are seen
yes.
operating, and they call them drones,
Yeah.
but what they are unidentified objects. They're swarming, and in some cases flying at 36,000 feet
Yes.
at Mach 0.75, that's nearly 1,000 kilometres an hour, 575 miles an hour. We don't have drone technology that can do that kind of thing, do we?
Let's put it to you like this. There's the known world and the unknown world of the DoD. Meaning, of course, that there are also, a lot of out there companies that are developing and testing all different kinds of things, but they wouldn't be flying them in test ranges necessarily, and jeopardizing pilots. As you know, that there was also an incident where one aircraft actually hit a drone.
An F-16 hit a drone, or supposed drone.
Yeah. So the problem is that you have that kind of flight safety thing. Those are usually very controlled kind of exercises, and you're not going to allow just anybody to pop in and pop out of those areas. And so what's going on there is very, very concerning from a flight safety standpoint. At the same time, it's a concern from the standpoint of, are these unknowns, or are these adversaries who have now gone at a higher level? And if you look at what they're doing and where they are, we've had these encounters over nuclear sites. We've had these encounters over military bases. We've had them over also test ranges. Who would be interested in what we're doing with that, right? Well, our adversaries would.
So this is definitely a flight safety and national security issue.
National security issue. And that's why the military has to have a full court press to figure out, how do I discern what is an adversary's technology that's being used in our airspaces to protect our people, and what is an unknown, which we can't explain, that has been on this planet for a very, very long time, and that you know where I'm coming from, right? So
Sure.
You have to be able to discern that.
So the lesson I take away from these
Yes.
videos is pilots are seeing things that
Yes.
are concerning them.
Always them. They've been reporting. Many times they won't report them, and that's the other problem. We've got to get even commercial pilots to be able to report them, because they're seeing them. And so consequently, we're learning in drips and drabs about these things. And now you have a reporting channel to where actually pilots can actually report those up to Aero.
Yeah.
And that's actually going on. I've looked at, on the classified side, I've looked at the Air Force videos that they're submitting to Aero.
And what conclusion do you reach?
Is that there are a lot of people that are humans, number one, that are also very fallible, that are pilots as well. Okay, they're human beings. And they're also they're seeing things that turn out to be birds or various other things under unusual circumstances, and drones that are also being put up by citizenry.
Real drones.
Real drones that are coming up at those altitudes, or the crazy altitudes where they are, and there's like, what is this?
But let me just give you one example I looked at just before we started this interview. 2016, a Tucson police helicopter
Yes.
follows an object for around about an hour.
Yeah.
It's at very high altitude. In fact, it disappears over a mountain at 14,000 feet.
Yeah, that's
it's the
pretty
helicopter that has to go away and refuel.
That's correct.
That's not a drone.
Yeah, and so we don't know what it is.
And a lot is happening in Arizona.
Yes,
Time to go to Arizona, I think.
I think so too. Let's go.
Rich, clearly, David Grush has suggested that there's a lot going on that the public's not being told about, that the military is concealing retrieval programs of non-human technology, that they're fully aware of non-human technology operating in our skies. Could the phenomenon that we're seeing across these training areas, but particularly in places like Arizona, be non-human?
I think it's very likely that you have that. I mean, again, going back to the fact that if you have an object that's doing something like even in a Nimitz case, where it's going Mach 55, you're talking about some capability way beyond ours.
We
that's
don't
doing
have
that.
technology.
We don't have technology that would withstand that kind of speed. So consequently, what do you have to say? Well, let's see. Could it, when we talk about non-human, and this is where I distinguish it. Let me put it to the way. Let's say, for an instance, that you have human technology in the year 3000 that allows you to maneuver back in space and time, and we've advanced in our, and so that human comes back in time and in space as reportedly seen in the air. Would you say that that is non-human, even though it had humans aboard? You get where I'm going at, right? So I don't jump to the non-human thing like David did. I go with the fact that we don't have enough information to know on, and we don't understand where the license plate is on the back of the car, where it's coming from, and which state that it belongs to. So in other words, we don't know where the origin is. And could it be us from a future time? And there's arguments to that same effect that you can make about certain cases where that's the case.
The other thing that David alleged, though, is that there's also a legacy reverse engineering program. That there's secret
I've heard about
construction.
I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, or where Wright-Patterson was, and I heard about Hangar 18 for years, okay?
Do you find it plausible that there is a long time hidden reverse engineering program ongoing? And could these objects that we're seeing, could some of them be something we don't yet know about, some secret program that the United States is concealing from the public?
Let me put it to you this way. Right here at Redstone Arsenal, you have the Missile Space Intelligence Center. All those crazy things like SCUDs and various other things, any kind of strange technology that we come across from another country or whatever, an adversary, will oftentimes be re-engineered by the military at MISIC for that. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, you have got NASIC. It used to be called FTD and ATIC, those two organizations. What was its job? To reverse engineer aircraft technology that was brought in from other countries to be able to figure out how it operates. Militaries, if you look at Greek fire and how that came about and how it was used, they would conquer another country and then they would take the technology and use it for their military. That's been going on throughout history. So if the alleged piece of an object, that came down, or we picked up a debris, where would it go? It would go to the military. They would take and re-engineer, and they would look at it, and they would try to figure it out. So there have been a lot of objects that have been sent to these locations to go and look at and figure out. And so, is it surprising? No. Secondly, there have been reports of crashes throughout history of objects.
Including in Arizona.
Yes, you all in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. You've got Roswell, New Mexico. You've got a whole host of these things.
What was the one in Arizona, though?
Well, the Kingman, Arizona is an interesting thing. First off, there was a nuclear test that was going on up in Nevada, and that triggered basically, apparently, they believed it was some sort of connection where 8 disc-shaped objects were seen moving through the skies around that same area. And apparently at one point, 3 of the objects came crashing down. And then you allegedly have the fact that the military came in and got what was left of the 3. One was almost like completely intact, and the other 2 were damaged from hitting the ground. And all that was collected and taken somewhere, all right? So it was...
And that's including the Kingman incident of 1953, is that right?
That's the Kingman incident of 1953. 3 objects that were recovered.
And where were they taken?
Well, that's the good question, isn't it? Where would they have gone? Okay, so, transporting a disc-shaped object is not going to be something...
It's pretty conspicuous.
It's like going down the highway, right? It's like, how are you going to do this?
Because the reason I ask this is, we're talking to a lot of people around the township of Sedona who are telling us they're seeing very, very unusual military activity. Mm-hmm. Black Hawk military helicopters, Apache military gunships, escorting black triangular lenticular craft. Could there be a base somewhere around there, hidden?
I've heard about military underground bases and stuff like that. It was alleged that there was a Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base underground, and they were doing cryogenics and various other things. So I also know, because I've been in the military world and stuff like that, We do have underground bases. I mean, that's probably not going to be too surprising to many people. That you have these areas like, for example, continuity of government. You have mountains where you go put people in and have senators and various other. So the likelihood of those types of things happening is yes, you can have that. Would that be the appropriate way to keep it from your adversaries? Yes, because guess what? They have spy satellites above us.
And more importantly,
So,
if there was a retrieval in the early 1950s,
Yeah.
you wouldn't want to cart it that far from Arizona.
well, that's true. You might want to do it where you can locally. The big question is, of course, looking for any evidence to support the fact that those things exist, which is often kind of hard to do, especially since it might be a classified site, and people don't want to talk about it. And so, consequently, you have a situation where you can have craft that are taken to those locations. And then, the attempt is for us to try to figure out how they operate or how they function, and that's a problem.
You're somebody who's spent 60 years of your life dealing with evidence, weighing empirical data.
Yeah.
Do you find it plausible that there is what David Grush alleges, a hidden reverse engineering program involving retrieved non-human technology?
It's very likely that there is that type of thing going on. Again, where we come up short often is, can we prove it in the world outside of the military? And that's the struggle, because if you can have witnesses to something like that. Many of them are aged because it's a long time ago, or they're not even alive anymore. So we're oftentimes chasing the undertaker to even get the human testimony that can back it up. And so we struggle with that. And for most of us to accept that, you're looking for that credible evidence that's going to back up what you're going to claim, right? I believe Grush has had the connections that he's talking about. I have every bit of respect for him. I understand, because I'm in the military world, about coming forward and risking your national security clearance. And I think that needs to be stressed, that it's going to put you into a threat kind of situation. It's also going to take away credentials. It could ruin your life. And there have been many cases where threats have been made, even back to the people in Roswell. I'm going to take you out in the desert and turn you loose. And they received those kind of threats, telling them that
People were threatened with death.
They were threatened with death. All right? So if you're talking about something on the level that he is, he's taking a huge risk. And he needs to be validated. And I think that those other people need to become whistleblowers to help support him on this. Or otherwise, he's just looking like the one taking the hit.
Final question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you find it plausible that a secret as big as this is capable of being kept? I mean, everything leaks.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of leaks, but there's also ways of controlling leaks, and using a whole bunch of other techniques and stuff like that to be able to discount the belief, right? So you can come up with just as easily a way of covering up, or countermeasures, if you would, that you would apply to be able to to control the leak. Make it look foolish, make it look ridiculous, make it whatever,
And this is what they've done with
Yeah.
this phenomenon. We've been told that UFOs are nonsense, it should be laughed at, it should be ridiculed. But there is evidence, solid evidence, empirical data that you've been analysing for 60 years to show this is real.
It's a real phenomena. It's always been a real phenomena. And it's always been on, for some reason, on this part of this planet for a very, very long time, and reported throughout the various other cultures. This is not a United States thing or an Arizona thing. This is a global phenomenon. And as soon as we begin to take advantage and look at this globally, and that's what we're trying to do. We've got people in SCU that are all over the planet, and we're having meetings, and we're connected with people in different countries. I went over and represented the United States over to a NATO meeting in Bologna, Italy, talking about UAPs. And so we're having those kind of conversations to bring the world together to address this and finally get some answers globally.
Rich, the lesson I take from the way you do your research at SCU is you need as many data points as possible to reach any kind of definitive conclusion.
Correct.
At the moment, we don't have enough data with this one to know for sure. The cigar is... I can't try to think of an analogy with cigar. You can't reach a conclusion definitively about the cigar. What kind of data would you need to be able to reach a conclusion?
Well, first off, what we need is not to have a video of a screen.
So if you could talk to the pilot.
Well, that would be nice. But the original image that's actually being photographed by whatever the camera is.
And clearly it was recorded.
And we need all that metadata, and we need to have a conversation about it.
Is this a frustration for you that often you hear about these incidents and you either don't get the video at all, or you hear about a video and you can't get hold of it? Because there is a lot of secrecy surrounding these kind of incidents.
Without a doubt. Which is why we need to partner with, the military, the government, whatever, to have access to be able to help support them in the analysis.
Because this is interesting. You, in your early part of your investigation career, you were collaborating with Project Blue Book. There was a genuine effort between you and the U.S. Air Force.
That's correct.
To actively investigate UAP cases, and it's now changed.
Yeah, well, I think that's also changing. And I'll say that what we're starting to see more and more is we're able to connect with, we're actually having conversations with NASA, and we're having conversations now with Aero and people. And our conference here is going to allow us to have some of the people from potentially Aero listening in. So, I think that's going to change, and I'm encouraged by that, because I think that we can help also the military and the government get a better understanding of that.
So there are ways of taking this further. We might be able to shed more light on the cigar. That's a good one, shed more light on the cigar. We might be able to get more light on the cigar if we can talk to the pilot, get a better, clearer image of the video, and then reach a more definitive conclusion.
That's correct.
Where are we at then? Like, obviously, there's the strong public suspicion that there's some kind of massive cover-up going on. Mm-hmm. Do you think there is?
Being in the military has been rather interesting for the 30 years that I've been with them. I don't think it's necessarily a cover-up as more as it is a lack of coordination and communication between parties. And so I think that there's it's more like a foul-up as opposed to a cover-up.
Always a sort of screw-up before a conspiracy.
Yeah.
But if there is like a legacy crash retrieval reverse engineering program, if we really do have retrieved alien technology, the implications of that may very well explain a lot of this phenomena we're seeing.
Oh, without a doubt. I wish I had that.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find News Nation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of News Nation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.